Today I'm talking about identity rooms, the idea that writing doesn't just express who I am, it actually shapes who I become. And at the center of this is a tension that I've been wrestling with all semester, probably my whole life. And the tension is this idea between identity and expectation. Um, I want to try to walk you through how audience shapes identity, how branding and rhetoric pull me in opposite directions, and how Threshold Concept 1.2 helped me understand the different rooms I move through as a writer. I want to start with the question: is the audience first or is it last? Do I write for myself or do I write for the people that are watching? Um, this slide captures the conflict of who I am or who I think I am and what people expect of me, and then who I become when I write. And the version of myself is shaped um, by the space I'm writing in. So there's two major frameworks that I'm exploring with this concept, and they express the conflict that I'm having inside of myself. So in this example, you know, personal branding versus the rhetorical concept that we're studying. This is a video by Matt Gray.
Kanye West. It's all with this one principle.
The audience comes last. How can that be?
Now, for a lot of people, that sounds like creativity suicide. Aren't you building for an audience? Well, the answer, sure, is they're part of the equation, but the most important part of the equation is you. It's your taste, your intuition, your judgment. And inevitably, when you get too caught up in what people think, you lose the true essence of what you're trying to build. And if you're looking to create an iconic brand, it's in that essence, the depth, that the beauty and the originality exist. And so when you're looking to be creative, you gotta block out the audience and you gotta focus on the craft and the product at hand.
So, in naming what we know, the Threshold Concept 1.2 helped me understand the rhetorical portion of this. When it's talking about writing addresses, it invokes and it creates the audience. Here it claims that writing is a social and rhetorical activity. Writing responds to people. Writing anticipates people. And writing constructs people. Each version of writing has its own audience. When you're addressing, you're speaking to a known audience. When you're invoking, you're speaking to an imagined audience. And when you're creating, you're speaking to a constructed audience or dream audience. Writing creates an audience in places like my website that doesn't just address readers, it creates them, It constructs a version of me that says that I am a professional author, and it constructs a reader who wants to know more about me and that my identity as an author. Writing addresses a known audience in places like Facebook, where you're speaking primarily to people that you grew up with or family and very close relatives. Christo said that writing is about finding your true and authentic voice and showing up as an imperfect person, sharing a strong point of view and lifting others through your own lived experience. Cousteau is a designer, but also a large, popular personal branding coach for creatives, including authors and designers, videographers, etc. And when he talks about authenticity being a part of his personal brand, it it confuses the idea that you are different depending on where you show up. So in naming what we know, we look to the social environment, and how we are responding to real people in real contexts. And writers are addressing an audience. They write to the readership of whatever medium that they're involving, they're writing. And Berlin, his framework was that the writer's identity is a part of the subject and the audience, and the expectation shaped the representation. And all of this highlights an aspect of identity known as foregrounding. Naming what we know that writing is never neutral because it always appears in some kind of social context or situation. And when it's addressing an audience, we draw on our understanding of that audience in order to propose what they value. And this is where the concept of foregrounding becomes a conscious act, where we emphasize certain parts of ourselves because we know who is listening. Berlin's rhetorical theory helps explain this when he explains that writer's identity interacts with the audience expectations, shaping what gets represented and how. So the addressing the audience becomes a direct form of writing as a social action. Branding then frames identity as stable, where rhetoric theory or rhetorical theory frames identity as situational. So just in my mind, more conflict arising, but kind of coming together a little bit better. Writing creates an audience. When you position yourself to a reader in a particular audience or in a particular stance, for or opposed or with or without or whatever, you're foregrounding a part of your own identity. And then that leads others to interpret what you're presenting to them. And identity becomes a lens for the reader to learn. Berlin talks about representation becomes negotiation. And I see that. It's starting to come together, the negotiation between flexibility and inflexibility. But let's hear from Aristotle.
The same speech coming out the mouth of a bland and nervous speaker is going to have far less impact than it would coming out of the mouth of a flamboyant and confident one. This testifies to the fact that public speaking is a kind of performance, and this is what truly distinguishes rhetoric as a form of art.
So this is where it came together for me. And I did watch many, many videos, and I went back to Aristotle and Plato and many others, just based on my um, linking this to the humanities as a general concept, and knowing that um, these people spoke a lot about philosophy, and for whatever reason, it came down to that for me. My mind went to philosophy as I started diving more deeply into these concepts and what they really meant. So, if writing is invoking an imagined audience, how are we anticipating the readers not physically present? If foregrounding becomes, partly unconscious, and if we're constantly cultural assumptions are being made, based on what we look like or what we sound like, and that's shaping what rises. And Berlin is now telling us openly that a writer imagines how the reader will interpret their subject. All of this points to the idea that we are performing on a stage, or to use Berlin's word. So branding says consistency, and rhetoric says adaptation. Branding seems to want your identity to be fixed, and rhetoric says constantly shift your voice. And it becomes this negotiation between these two warring sides within myself, represented here, but also within the larger conversation about writing and, showing up in the world. So what I discovered, what I think I discovered, what I'm continually discovering, is that each writing space does demand a different set of a different presentation of self. Each audience shapes what I present to them. And identity is rhetorical and not fixed, as far as writing identity. So there may be inconsistency in the way that I show up for my fiction writing, not in the level of craft that I'm presenting, but in the way that I'm presenting myself there. And I equated this in my mind, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, with a house with a bunch of different rooms, and each room has its own purpose and its own mirror. So when I go to my bedroom to sleep, I'm not the same version of myself when I'm in the kitchen cooking. And when I'm in the living room just relaxing, I'm not the same person as when I go to check on my kids or play with my kids. They're similar to how I show up in these places in my own home in different ways. I'm showing up in the world in different ways depending on what needs to be happening. So identity is a rhetorical performance. Whether that is rhetorical, like you're writing based on the situation that you're going through, or even what people are today labeling as personal brand, how you're showing up in front of your audience as a creative, as an author, or whatever else. That writing is enacting an identity. You're performing that. That audience is shaped by what we foreground. If we're presenting to people a certain version of ourselves, we are going to attract an audience that is drawn to that part of what we're showing them. And that branding tries to simplify this, while rhetoric, not to say actually that it complicates, maybe this is a poor word choice, but just that it leans into the natural variety of situations and tries to identify and make it understandable and academic, an academic look at what is happening. And identity emerges in each situation through negotiation, that it is always an in between this or that kind of thing. Here I just wanted to play a quick clip by Daniel.
Difficult is but most people make it so hard for you to learn about that, for you to discover it. The way they show up in the world is not, it doesn't reflect the fact that they've actually, it's almost like having a beautiful piece of jewelry and just handing it over in a normal Tesco shopping bag or something like that, and it's not wrapped and packaged the right way. So I personally, the thing I've noticed the most is I'm always, when I get to know someone better, I'm always quite stunned as to what they've done in their past. I'm like,
so the same thing that Daniel Priestley is saying about, building a relationship with an audience, or selling your product to a client, or being discovered as a person within your niche that's worth listening to, or whatever the case may be, it is about performance. It is the packaging that you're putting around whatever it is that you're presenting. So he equates it here to jewelry in a plastic shopping bag, which is humorous to think of, but it's also like very accurate. If you're not presenting yourself to the world in a professional way, I am here, I am writing, I am taking my writing seriously, and therefore I am presenting this to you as a serious, thing, then you're not actually giving them anything to talk about. But what's inside the bag matters as well. So the rhetoric, that actually what you're writing, and showing that you considered who you're talking to, is just like this plastic bag around this jewelry. You're not considering what you have inside, and you're not presenting it well to other people. In my mind, it's the negotiation of those rooms. Once again, like who I am when I'm cooking in the kitchen and preparing a meal and going and cutting vegetables and making sure that things are not, salmonella isn't getting everywhere or whatever, is a different person than the person who's in, my son's room playing PlayStation with my kids. And it's not because any of those things are false or any of those things are lies that I'm presenting to the public. It is just showing up appropriately for that particular situation. Hope this helped in some kind of way. Thank you for listening.